Hello, so today we'll be going over the best comps for patch 15.5. This is day 1 of the patch, and I like to make these videos to give you some recommendations for climbing. These aren't necessarily going to be the highest cap, strongest versions of comps, but they're going to be ones that I think are relatively consistent and good to play on the current patch. If you like my content, make sure to like and subscribe. So we just did our patch review yesterday. Today is kind of leaning into that. Once per week, I also do these best comps videos. So if you like these best comp videos, you'll get a new one next week if things get updated or changed. But there's also guides. I do daily TFT guides, like the item guides. You can check out this playlist if you're a beginner player. Additionally, on my VOD channel, if we get 1,000 subs on this channel, we'll do an RP giveaway. But anyways, let's get straight into it. So usually I like to pick a handful, 3 or 4 non-reroll or level 8 style comps and 3 or 4 reroll related comps to talk about. We're going to start with the non-reroll comps, so let's start with Star Guardian. Star Guardian is very strong right now. A lot of the comps that used to be good or were really strong, they kind of got a little bit of adjustments. Star Guardian really didn't get anything, which means that now it was already good on last patch. It's going to be very good on this patch, or it's going to be one of the better comps on the patch. When you're playing Star Guardian, you're typically going to be playing as many Star Guardians as possible, going for that chase unit of Seraphine to hit that 8 Star Guardian. Usually you're itemizing towards Jinx. Jinx is going to be your main carry. There are some other niche lines that you can play around some of the other units in the background, but typically this is going to be your board, and on level 8 you're just not playing the Seraphine. Additionally, you'll have one extra spot, so a lot of times it's something that fits in to help your front line. One of the better units to play usually is Kabuko, just to get heavyweight active on your Poppy, and then you can give durability to your whole board because Kabuko gives you the mentor bonus. When I think about Jinx, there are a couple builds for Jinx. She is a little bit flexible with her items, which is nice. She gets a lot of attack speed from her passive, so a lot of times, I don't prefer to have an attack speed style build. Usually what I'm prioritizing is something just to make her hit like a truck, so I like to have my IE, and then I like to have some sort of damage amp. Giant Slayer, it was really strong last patch, still really strong. They didn't nerf the item. So Giant Slayer, if you have to get into your head of what's a decent item that works with multiple different comps, Giant Slayer, it's a really good item. Really good bang for the buck. It does a lot of damage amp. It's really strong since they buffed it. So Giant Slayer is still going to be a good option for most of your builds. Now with Jinx, you can usually go for triple damage. She has enough attack speed that she's going to pump out damage anyways and get her ult off pretty effectively. So you can go for a third damage item here. You can go for a Strikers, get some crit synergy, right? Increase that critical strike chance. You can go for more base stats, a Deathblade, just ramp up those base stats. Additionally, if you're going for a crit build, you can also give her some utility in the form of Last Whisper, but we'll talk about that when we get to some of the fruits. But you have many different fruits, many different options. One thing that people also sometimes do is Kraken. Kraken also works out nicely because you have so much attack speed on your built-in passive that you actually can stack up Kraken pretty effectively and do a lot of damage. So builds like this are going to be really effective on Jinx. If you want to do something a little bit more safe and you want to deal with some components that might be a little bit more problematic, something like a Shojin also works really well on Jinx, and we'll talk about it in a second. Getting her to cast with the extra attack speed makes her to do allows her to do a huge amount of damage. But typically Shojin is going to be reserved if you're digging for a specific fruit. The triple damage is usually going to be better. I think you'll have more success with it if you're playing around the Star Guardians. Additionally, you have Poppy. Poppy, you have 2 different builds based on fruits, so a lot of times you're just building tank items, or based on a certain fruit, you can stack a lot of, shielding related items, right? So items that give her a shield are pretty good, because now we'll go through the power-ups. Specifically on Poppy, if you go for best defense, this is one of Poppy's good fruits, right? As you can see, Poppy gets it. She basically turns into an insane damage dealer if you stack a bunch of shielding items on her. But other than that, you're typically just going for either, Unstoppable, which works out to be pretty well, and then Body Change. Body Change is usually one of the better options. Unstoppable is kind of good if you're just going for repeat stun, but it doesn't make the Poppy too tanky. Body Change is great because you get the health shield, and it also works with the Nico passive for Star Guardian, where you get increased shielding. So having shielding stuff works out pretty well. But typically you're going for those. If you have a lot of shielding items, you can try and go for best defense on the Poppy. Now, Jinx in particular, something that came up of being one of her better options is Gather Force. Gather Force became, on last patch, one of the best Jinx fruits that you can hit, and this is one that you typically dig for. Jinx kind of suffers from not having some of the best fruits in terms of actually scaling up her damage in a meaningful way. Gather Force works really well, and usually this is reserved for like specific Shojin builds, or even without a Shojin. Basically, the amount of AD that you get after 2 casts or so, you basically get like a Deathblade equivalent of AD, and that's only after 2 casts. It continues to stack. This one is very high cap and gives her a lot of base stats, which makes her extremely heavy hitter, especially if you go for a crit build, because you'll multiply that crit build because you're gonna have a lot of that base AD from this. So Gather Force is definitely one of the better options, but a lot of times Skypiercer also works. Skypiercer allows you to not have to worry about making Shred or Sundering, and Star Guardians as a board does a lot of AD damage, obviously because you're playing Jinx, but also because of Xayah passive, where you do extra magic damage on attacks. It actually works really well to have Skypiercer because it efficiently allows you to make many damage items without having to worry about utility items, and then allows your whole board to optimize their damage, because eventually your high cap version of Seraphine and Ahri and all of these other units, all of them are going to do magic damage, so it actually works out to be pretty effective. So usually those are the 2 fruits that you're normally going for. You could go for some of the attack speed builds, you could go for some other fruits if they make sense for your board, but that's like the typical way to try and play around this to have it do its best. And then obviously Seraphine, she has really good scaling with different items. You can just shove whatever on her and usually she'll be pretty good, but you can also build her like an AP unit to just do a bunch of damage. She basically drops a nuke. I think, like, you know, meme builds like Warmogs and what's it called, in Crown Guard are typically like considered like Seraphine Bis, because they give so much stats that usually like they make her ramp up her bonus effects of like the extra stats making her stronger. But you can just build her like a normal AP unit as well and do a bunch of damage that way. Next board we're going to talk about, Soul Fighter. Now, Soul Fighter, I think, is a lot less stable. I think it's not, to me at least, I don't prefer Soul Fighter if I'm angling a 4-cost comp unless I really have AD items, because it feels a bit awkward. It has like these intermittent areas where you're like not super strong, but you're not that weak. So I would recommend, if you want to play Soul Fighters, you play it from ahead. And I'll continue to elaborate a little bit later. But basically, when you're playing Soul Fighter, 8 Soul Fighter is the way to go. If you don't have an emblem, it requires you to hit the Gwen. So a lot of times you want to play it from ahead, so that if you don't hit the Gwen, you can make it to level 9 to find the Gwen. Because you'll be okay on level, you'll be okay with 6 Soul Fighter, like on level 8. But if you're really low HP, there's a chance that like 1 or 2 people, if they hit their whole board, you'll just lose the fights and then you'll just be dead. So you want to make sure that you're playing it from an advantage. That way you have the time and the HP in order to make sure or secure the Gwen, so doesn't just feel like a high roll, low roll situation. Basically, Soul Fighter gives a lot of base stats. You get a bunch of HP, so it makes all of your units really tanky, or not like very tanky, but decently tanky. And then you also get a bunch of AP and AD, which also makes a bunch of units hit like a truck. So with Soul Fighter, you're almost always going to want to play 8 Soul Fighter, and typically you're going to have Set as your main tank, and you're going to have Samira as your main damage dealer. With Samira, she's similar to Jinx in that you can go one of 2 builds a lot of the times. Usually you're either going for triple damage. Obviously you're going to have base stats with Samira, so giving her crit and damage amp is going to make her hit like a truck. So obviously like you can go a full crit build, like i.e. Strikers. You can also go i.e. Giant Slayer, because Giant Slayer is just a really good item. You should always have that in your mind. You can go for triple damage, something like this. And just have like the crit and the damage amp and just have her hit like a truck. Additionally, you can also give utility because she spreads it really well. So stuff like Red Buff and Last Whisper could also work, albeit this makes her hit like less like a truck. She's obviously going to do less damage this way, but she's really good at spreading utility. I don't know why I won't put the Last Whisper on her, but because she spins around when she jumps in, it usually gives her a good opportunity to do a bunch of damage. However, something that you'll often see on Samira is a Shojin or a blue buff. A lot of people prefer blue buff just because it gives you a little bit more in terms of stats rather than Shojin. So we'll just put blue buff for now. With Samira, she basically has this passive where she gains these stacks every time she casts, and then she does like this giga cast on her 4th time. So having the mana generation helps her to get off to that big hit or that big final cast earlier rather than later. So a lot of times you'll see mana gen on the Samira with some form of crit and or damage amp items, but she's relatively flexible. I think that, you know, either triple damage or mana double damage items are going to be important, because I feel like with my Samira I'm usually having a damage issue. Gwen, especially in 8 Soul Fighter, just hits like a truck anyways. So usually, because she's hitting whole board, you actually like to put utility on her. One of her best items is going to be something like a Morello or a red buff, just to give anti-heal. Just spread it to your whole board. She's a great holder of those things. Additionally, you could just build her like an AP caster, give her like crit, same way you would build Samira, but now you're doing the AP version of that. But something that really goes a long way, Gwen, because she kind of like stays near the front line, could often die before she gets her last cast off, and that's usually devastating for this board. Edge of Night, one of her best items. Gives her some attack speed, but also gives her the survivability to make sure that she gets her cast off, because she's going to be one of the late game carries for your board. Off to the side, we have Volibear. Volibear fits in nicely to get Edgelord active on your Samira, gives a little bit of extra AD and also some extra like survivability. Volibear has many different builds as well. A lot of times Volibear, you like to like, he has built-in attack speed that just got buffed. So the attack speed in the Omnivamp is usually enough, that with Edgelord. So a lot of times when you're building your Volibear, you can build them more towards damage items. With the attack speed, Kraken can work. You can build IE, and you can build stuff like Giant Slayer just to make sure that he's getting those resets, because he has a thing where he kills a unit, then he'll jump to a new unit and whatever. It helps him to like kind of reset on those front lines a little bit more easily by being able to chew through them. Additionally, you could build him for some survivability as well. A lot of times you'll have 2 items and an Edge of Night just to make sure he doesn't to just like get killed by some random shit because he's in the front line. So this allows him to de-aggro, which helps him out a little bit. So you can build like that as well. One thing I want to mention, it might be a little bit experimental, so I didn't want to put it as like a main thing and talk about all the itemizations, but playing around Volibear, especially if you're playing these Soul Fighter boards, there is a potential to flex between like just playing Soul Fighter and then playing deeper into Edgelord Luchador. This was a comp that was very good when Volibear was good for like that one patch before they giga nerfed him and reworked him. But with this comp, I've actually seen it have some success and also looks good in the stats. So I think that with the Volibear buffs to his attack speed, this comp also works out to be pretty well. So here you're either going to try and play around 4 Luchador early, or 6 Edgelord or 4 Edgelord as early as you can, and usually pair that with some Soul Fighter Juggernaut because of the synergies that tie in. You can usually go dual carry Volibear and Samira, and it works similar to how I was talking about the Soul Fighter board. Soul Fighter, you're specifically more targeting towards Samira items, tank items for Set, and then items for Gwen. This board, you're more going for Samira Volibear items, double damage items, because these units are going to be doing all the heavy lifting, and then afterwards you can build maybe tank items or Braum items for late game and then like move them over from Set to Braum. But usually you're more prioritizing like double melee, double AD items here, and here it's more of like either mixture of items because you'll have AP for Gwen, AD for Samira, or you'll have like, you know, your tank items for Set and Samira, because in this case the Volibear, even if you have items, it's obviously great, but if you don't have a proper dedicated tank, the Samira might have a little bit of trouble in a setup like this. But either one could be fine. Like I said, this one I think is a little bit more experimental because obviously it's first day of the patch. Sometimes people just are memeing around, things look better than they could, and then it's like a little bit awkward. There's a chance that this comp is not as good as the Soul Fighter comp, or it's better, but I just want to bring it to your attention in case you have more melee-centric items, or if you have like an early Volibear too. I think this one leans more heavily into the Volibear. It does require the 5 costs, so it's a little bit awkward on stage 8, but it's something that you can think about if you hit like Volibear and you don't hit the rest of the Soul Fighter board. Hello, so adding this in post, but I forgot to say the fruits for the Soul Fighter board. Typically on Samira, you want on the edge. This one's going to be your most important thing. So a lot of times when I'm talking about Soul Fighter, I'm talking about the synergies of the units. We're mostly talking about like the Samira and like a crit build to multiply that base AP and AD that you get from Soul Fighter. So it makes a lot of sense to pair that with crit and damage amp. So something that really helps you is on the edge. Obviously, if you don't have crit, you can take one of the crit related fruits and then like build towards damage amp, but typically this one's going to work really well. You start the combat with 65% health, but then you gain 35 damage amp. This is a substantial amount of damage amp that you get. It recently got added as one of Samira's primary fruits, which makes the comp a little bit more consistent, and I think there is a noticeable difference between this and everything else. So I think this is definitely by far the best. If you have to dig, I would dig for this one. Additionally, the 65% health isn't that much of an issue because Samira gains Omnivamp. By the time she actually dives in and she's doing her damage, you'll usually would have recovered all of this health anyways because she's a backline unit. So the downside to this isn't really a downside, which is why it's so good on her. So make sure that this is the one that you're usually going for if you're specifically playing around that board. Next, I want to talk about sorcerers. Sorcerers, I think, are pretty good. With sorcerers, you basically are just playing 6 Sorc and Mighty Mech. This was a comp that was really, really strong a while ago, and now once again it kind of crept up. Last patch it was one of the more reliable 4-cost comps to play around, and it also has a little bit of flexibility. But basically, you play 6 Sorc, you play around Mighty Mech because you have the synergy with the Jarvan, and then in order to help out the Jarvan, you're either playing Strategist with the Rise that also gives you the Mentor bonus, or if you don't have these upgrades, you can also fit in a Cassante a lot of the time, and kind of play this as an extra frontline unit. Mighty Mech gives you the Mighty Mech unit to give you the extra frontline, which is really nice. But a lot of times you're playing around Karma. Karma, usually you want blue buff and a JG. You could make Shojin as well, depending on your item economy. Of course, you just want some sort of mana generation to make sure that she gets her ult off. And then, because you're playing Sorcs, the main thing about Sorcs is that they just get a bunch of AP. You just have a shit ton of AP. So with that AP, what do you want to do? You want to pair it with crit and damage amp to multiply it to do as much damage as possible. So in this case, you want to give it... Excuse me, I think this song's a little bit loud. I'm going to put it a little bit lower. So in this case, usually JG is really good, just because you're making her ult crit, so you're taking that huge amount of base AP, and you're making it crit, which basically multiplies it to do more damage. As a last item, sometimes you'll see people make another crit item, right? Another glove-related item, so that you kind of pair it nicely with the crit builds. Or you can also go for Giant Slayer, because Giant Slayer is really good, right? It makes the crits a little bit less consistent, so you might be subject to some RNG, but Giant Slayer is just such a strong item, and it gives you so much damage amp that it works really well at tank busting and can be really effective. Gwen, similarly to Soul Fighter, usually you're putting utility on the Gwen, and then also you're putting Edge of Night on the Gwen. Now, this board, I think, is a little bit more temperamental. I think it caps high, and it can really win games, and it could be really strong, especially if you hit a Gwen too. This unit just nukes the whole board. However, without the Gwen, the board is a little bit weird. You can still fit in on level 8. You can still hit 6 Sorc because you can play Ahri over Gwen, right? You still have the synergies. You have the tools to make it like stable and okay. But this board really comes together when you hit a Gwen, and I think it's like a Gwen, right? If you find a singular Gwen, this board becomes infinitely better. So a lot of times you want to make sure that you're not playing this from super crazy of a contested spot or anything like that. I would say it's similar to Soul Fighter, right? You want to play it from like a decent level of like power and advantage, some extra HP to work with, just so that you're not like completely dead in the water if things go wrong. Additionally, one thing I want to mention, I didn't mention on Soul Fighter, but I'll mention on both of them. When we're talking about some of these builds, Samira, another item you could put instead of a blue buff or something, is actually a Nashor's Tooth. Samira specifically because you can go for full damage and not necessarily crit builds. Nashor's actually helps because you get like some bonus mana. And it gives you like a little bit of extra crit synergy for like a full crit build like this. It can also work on Karma as a third item, right? You could go like blue buff something Nashor's, but specifically on a unit like Karma, Nashor's I don't think would be enough mana generation to warrant like not making a blue buff, if that makes sense. So I would be a little bit more cautious about that. And then Star Guardian as well, you can maybe interchange Nashor's. I didn't talk about it, but if you have those items and you're going for a crit build, you can always interchange Nashor's on some of these AD units that don't necessarily need the dedicated casting that Karma needs in this case. Another thing that's great, this comp can use infinite tiers. You always want to make sure that you have some sort of Protector's Vow on the unit, like Jarvan. Okay, so in terms of fruits, I'm going to try and scroll because it's a little bit hard to find this one. But typically on Karma, you want to have Mage. Mage basically makes her cast twice. Her cast timing is pretty low, but basically you'll do more damage. It got buffed a little bit, so this one's one of her better ones. It just works really well. Additionally, there's also Efficient, but typically you're going for Mage. Mage is going to be a little bit better. Efficient has some good synergies as well that you just get your ability casting a little bit faster. Those are usually the two that you really want, but she's also pretty flexible. Like even Shadow Clone in certain cases can work well depending on your item distribution, so something like this can also be an alright option, but typically the one that you're going for is Mage. It's hard to find because damage shares the wording there. Additionally, what I want to do one more comp. Usually I pick 3 comps, the Sorc board, the Soul Fighter board, and this last board I think are all spot dependent of you having a good spot for that one particular comp. I would say Yuumi is also really good on the current patch. Maybe not the strongest. I think that Leona is not as tanky as she used to be, so this comp feels a little bit like worse for wear, so to speak. But basically, this is the Battle Academia Prodigy board. It used to be really strong, but then there was a lot of nerfs, so it's kind of been like irrelevant for the last couple weeks. Now it's back. There was a lot of changes to Yuumi that basically make this comp a lot better. A lot of the Yuumi changes make it so that Yuumi has more upfront damage and does more damage like at the start of the fight. So in order to make a good build for Yuumi now, you actually want to give her more upfront damage rather than scaling damage, because like she gets less pages as the fight goes on, but she also starts with more pages, so she's just better out the gate. What I would suggest with Yuumi is JG, obviously, because you want to just make her ults crit. Base AP is really good here, so like stuff like a Rabadons can work out well. Before in the past, you used to always build Archangels JG on Yuumi, and that was like your better set of items. I would refrain from making Archangels. I think that it's just not good enough because it scales a lot slower and it doesn't synergize with Yuumi doing a little bit more upfront damage. I think Archangels isn't that great. I would rather just go for more upfront damage. Giant Slayer, we've been talking about it all day, but obviously it's a really good item right now. That's going to make you hit like a truck. Give yourself a Giant Slayer. Then you can build more into the crit. You can also put some utility items on her, but usually you're going to try and move all the utility items onto a Malzahar for later. One item that works really well with the Yuumi, just because of how she has like a good chunk of like, you know, she shoots all the pages, she does like a big explosive hit. Gunblade, actually. Gunblade's a great use of a sword, and basically scales really well, right? It gives her a good chunk of ability power. It also has a little bit of like mana regen. It gives good stats, and it also gives the Omnivamp, which helps the board sustain itself, because, you know, especially the front line, it can sometimes feel a little bit papery, especially the Leona. To your front line, you're usually going for Leona and Cassante. A lot of times you want to try and itemize both of them in order to make this work out well. And then late game, you can also cap around the Seraphine in order to have your 5 Prodigy active. With this comp, Yuumi specifically, the fruits are a bit weird. I think you can kind of go for anything, kind of fill in the gaps for your board. But most of the time, you're really going to want Bullet Hell. It scales up her damage so much more effectively than anything else because she basically fires 30% more pages. It works as like a 30% extra increase in damage, and these projectiles also do true damage. That's part of Yuumi's ability. So Bullet Hell has really good scaling in that regard because basically she's going to do a bunch of extra pages which do true damage. It's just good. So I would definitely lean towards Bullet Hell in a lot of these cases because I think that it would be a little bit of a better option to go towards. Of course, those are the 4 cost comps. Like I said, besides Stargarding, I think Stargarding is good to play, like, you know, on an average case, like it's just a decent comp to like angle towards. I think, you know, Soul Fighter, or if you're playing specifically the Volibear variation where you're not playing Soul Fighter, instead playing Edgelord Luchador, Sorcerers, or Battle Academia, I think they all have their pros and cons. I think you can have success with any of them on the current patch, but I think that your spot has to be very indicative of those, right? You don't really want to have mana generation on the Yuumi because you have the Prodigy active, so you care more about, like, you know, damage items here. Sorcerer, you care a little bit more about, like, you know, having the synergies to play around the Gwen, so, you know, it's a little bit high cap but more risky. And then these boards, obviously, you want to be relatively uncontested because I think, like, if you don't have Samira 2, this comp really struggles to do damage on stage 8 if you don't have 8 Soul Fighter in, or sorry, on level 8 if you don't have 8 Soul Fighter in, or you want to play it from an advantage so that you can basically hit the Gwen and cap out really high with, like, everybody upgraded. But anyways, those were our non-reroll comps. Now let's go through some of the reroll comps that I think are particularly strong. Starting with Kog'Maw. I think Kog'Maw is really strong on the current patch. So what they did is Monster Trainer. If you didn't watch the patch notes, they now got rid of the leveling up mechanic, and instead they took all the monsters and they gave them like more enhanced abilities, like parts of their level 30 and their level 15 are now into their base kit. Kog'Maw, I think, benefited the most from this because out of all the monsters, Kog'Maw's spike getting to level 30 was significantly more, and he was significantly weaker early game without having the extra bonus effects. Now he does more damage with his passive, he has the on-cast attack speed off rip, and he also does Shred and Sunder, but he did that before, so he's just a really good unit for early game now, and I think that he actually can hold a lot of great items. So with Kog'Maw, Usually play him with protectors because there are some synergies, but you can play him really with any front line, I would say. You usually just want to play him with a vertical front line because basically the way Kog'Maw works is that his auto attacks are going to do a bunch of damage. He's going to gain a bunch of attack speed via his active, and then after he gains a bunch of attack speed, he's eventually going to get to a point where he's melting everybody on the enemy team. So with Kog'Maw, usually what you're going for is not Guinsoo. Like, he's an auto attacker, so you would usually go for like attack speed. You would think Guinsoo is good on him, but he actually gets so much attack speed from his active that instead you would rather just give him mana gen so that he gets his active off more, and that way he'll get the attack speed anyways. He'll reach his max attack speed cap, and then you'll be fine in the fight no matter what. So a lot of times you actually go Shojin on him. And I know it seems like a little bit counterintuitive. It's just because he gains so much attack speed so fast that he's gonna scale like faster than the Guinsoo anyway, so you might as well just give him the mana gen and help him scale that way, because it just helps him to keep his ult casting, because once he reaches that max attack speed, he's just infinitely casting, which is really nice. Additionally, Archangels works really well. In this case, you're playing towards stalling out until the Kog'Maw melts everybody. So Archangels obviously is going to be good because you're stalling out really long and you're relying on your front line and your whole team synergy of protectors to basically allow you to live as long as possible. The attacks that he does deal extra AP damage, which scales off his AP stat, so Archangel will make it so that every single one of his attacks is going to do an insane amount of damage. So something like this is usually like your first pass at what you're going for items. Last item, I've seen double Shojin be really good because, like, you know, you just make him cast even faster. It kind of just works well with his kit, just infinite mana gen. I've seen Gunblade work really well, just have him infinitely heal, allow him to like sustain everybody a little bit more. I've also seen a third damage item also be alright in this case. A lot of times you're going to try and make some sort of anti-heal, which will either be a frontline or backline item. And when you're rolling for Kog'Maw, a lot of times you roll for Nico 3-star. I think that in this comp, something that you shouldn't really look past is Janna 3 and Rakan 3. If you're stuck on level 7, for example, and you want to roll for these, it can help you a lot to hit all of them, because Rakan is decently tanky with the 6 protector, and Janna can actually do some good damage if you give her some of the utility items that you would want to build. But with Kog'Maw, Kog'Maw also has really good fruits. There's 2 fruits that are particularly incredible on him. One of them is Fairy Tail. So Fairy Tail, on cast, spawn 2 fairies that deal extra damage based on stage. This extra magic damage is actually massive on the Kog'Maw, and spawning these 2 fairies, basically there's a point where Kog'Maw just spawns infinite fairies because you basically have infinite attack speed and you have mana generation. So if you go for the mana generation build, this basically increases your damage tremendously, so it's extremely strong. The other one that is typically chosen with him is Caretaker. So Caretaker, basically on cast, which again Kog'Maw is infinitely casting, lowest percent ally gains a shield which scales off AP. So if you have the Archangel Shojin build, you're basically going to be constantly granting shields to your entire board. This one fits in really nicely with protectors because they get shields, and then additionally, when they're shielded, they also gain durability. So you get a little bit of bonus value there, which is really nice. The thing that's really important to note with Caretaker is that I think it's less common on the Kog'Maw, so it's hard to dig for. And also, sometimes your damage could be lacking a little bit because this basically is allowing you to stall out. So you basically have to stall your opponent as long as possible. Sometimes the fight goes into overtime and you can lose in these cases. So be a little bit cautious about it. Be a little bit careful. But if you have like 3 damage items, for example, I think Caretaker is obvious. But usually you just pick one or the other. Whichever one you hit first is the one that you're going to take. Additionally, Kog'Maw, amazing with artifacts, especially now that he's a lot better. Right, I'm not sure if Wit's End is particularly incredible, but this is obviously going to be good. The main ones that you want, though, are Dawn Core or Flicker Blade. So Flicker Blade, obviously, he's auto-attacking infinite. He's just going to ramp this up infinitely. It's broken, right? It's like minus 1 point something on him. It's like Exodia. So Flicker Blades, obviously, we all agree it's Exodia. The other one that's Exodia is Dawn Core. Dawn Core, once you cast, you reduce your max mana. Fits with the whole build, right? The whole thing that we're talking about with him casting infinitely. Dawn Core, even in the prior patch, it made Kog'Maw one of the best units in the game, and that was before he got what I would call like a big buff to his kit, basically not having to scale with the monster trainer levels. So this one, extremely good on him. So just keep those 2 in mind. Of course, there's other ones, but there's like lots of hits because you can also use Lichbane. Similar effect, it procs on cast, so you got that going for you. And you can also go for Static Shiv, which similarly, every attack you do extra magic damage. So this item as well also works. So basically what I'm trying to say is you just rip artifacts with this comp, because if you get a frontline one, you put it on the front line, and if you get one of like 4 or 5 backline items. They're all good on Kog'Maw, so you have a really good chance of spiking your board in a tremendous way. Now, one other tip that I wanted to give, I'm going to explain something here that is a bug. However, this bug was used in tournament and was allowed by Riot in tournament games, and this bug is becoming more and more prevalent in how people are playing around these Kog'Maw units or these monster trainer units in the current patch. And I don't think it was fixed yet, and it's becoming more and more apparent on ladder. So I'm not telling you guys to bug abuse, I'm not telling you guys about it, but I want to let you guys know about it because apparently it was legal in tournament. So to me that means it's legal on ladder, and I think that's why everybody is doing it now. So until they fix it, this is something that's just important to know because it helps you to play the comp. Like, you know, people are joking that it's a feature, but basically when you buy a monster, the amount of monsters that you buy aren't scaled properly. The way it's supposed to work is that when you buy a monster, it treats the pool size as the highest EXP monster, or the monster that you have the most of or whatever. Currently, they are separate pools of monsters. So what happens is, if you play Kog'Maw, and then you switch it to a Rammus, and then you buy a Rammus, right? This Rammus is from the Rammus pool. It's not from the Kog'Maw pool. Then when you switch it back to Kog'Maw, and you see another one in your shop, right? This will be a Kog'Maw, but it's not a Kog'Maw. It was actually bought from the Rammus pool. So then, now when you buy this Kog'Maw, it's from the Kog'Maw pool. So what does that mean? If you math it out, basically when you're playing a reroll comp, you're trying to find 9 copies of a unit, and what makes it hard is that there's only 17 available copies of that unit. So if you buy 9 copies of Kog'Maw, the last Kog'Maw is hard to find because you're looking for the 9th Kog'Maw out of the 17. There's less and less available, so you're less and less likely to see the Kog'Maw, right? What people are doing now, because it was legal in tournament apparently, which, you know, take it up with Riot. I don't think it should have been legal in tournament. I think maybe if it's a bug like this, we should maybe consider not doing it, but, you know, it is what it is. What you do now is you buy 3 copies of Kog'Maw. Then, when you start rolling for more copies of the unit, you don't roll with Kog'Maw in. You switch the Kog'Maw to a different monster, and then you buy 3 copies of that monster. Then you go back and you swap. Once you find 3 copies of that, you find 3 copies of the last monster. Then you have a 3-star unit, and then it's 3-star Kog'Maw, and then you can just switch it back to Kog'Maw. And what that does is, like, even if somebody's griefing you or they're trying to both contest you playing Kog'Maw, because you're using 3 separate sets of pools, it's very easy to find the first 3 of them. This also allows people to hit Kog'Maw way earlier than expected. If you're playing your game and you look at somebody's board and they instantly teleport to Kog'Maw 3, that's why. And like I said, you know, take it up with Riot. I don't know if it's going to be bug abuse. Like, I try not to do these things. I'm just trying not to play Kog'Maw unless I have a spot for it. But everybody's doing it, and I don't think they're going to ban everybody. And if so, they should have banned the people in tournament because, like, they literally watched it happen live, and it happened in multiple games in tournament on the weekend. So I'm just telling you guys the knowledge that is how it's, like, how to optimize hitting your units faster because everybody else is doing it, and it's kind of tilting, it's kind of annoying, but I don't want to be here and not tell you guys about it because, like I said, it was allowed by Riot Games, so take it up with them. But anyways, next comp that I think is really strong is Battle Academia. So this is Battle Academia Jayce. Jayce got an insane amount of buffs. He got really strong on, like, they just buffed his physical damage for 3-star by a huge amount. So this Caitlyn Jayce comp, typically you would play it and you try and position like your units kind of like this, and then you're hoping that between Jayce, who has like an AoE effect where he shoots extra sparks based on potential, and Caitlyn, who shoots this bouncing ball that aims towards the furthest enemy, you're hoping that the Caitlyn will snipe the backline, bounce the ball around, kill a bunch of units, and then Jayce will finish them off by bouncing the ball. This comp was really common a couple patches ago, but basically it's a combination of Jayce and Caitlyn, and the fact that when you play high Battle Academia, they gain a lot of potential, and that potential allows them to basically do a shit ton of damage to the backline. And you can often scam fights. This board can beat any board, even the strongest board, because you can instantly snipe a carry if you position well, and you get lucky on your 50-50 if they don't position for the Caitlyn. But anyways, you position it like this, so you split up the front line, give Caitlyn a clear shot at the back line. When you're playing this comp, a lot of times Jayce, he works really well with like melee AD items, so stuff like Sterix, Bloodthirster can work really well. He used to be pretty good with Titans, but I feel like without it giving armor and MR, it's a little bit more like like I don't like it as much, but I would rather just build more towards like tankiness, like maybe like a double Sterix, or you can build them with like some other sword related or AD items, and in the worst case you can still build Titans, it's fine. With Caitlyn, however, you're usually going for some form of mana gen, so a lot of times it's something like a blue buff, and then you build her with crit, because you're just trying to like one tap the back line. So something like IE, you can go IE Guard Breaker, you can go IE Giant Slayer, but she's aiming at backline, so Giant Slayer might be a little bit awkward in this case, but it's still good. Or you can just go like you know, utility, but usually it's like blue buff IE or Shojin IE, right? If you don't have the capabilities of making the blue buff. But this board works really well, and then obviously extra tank items can go on Leona. Extra damage items could also go on Yuumi. You can actually play around Yuumi with some AP items, and when you level up, a lot of times you're playing a heavyweight unit, and then eventually if you make it to high cap, you can play a sniper unit as well. Usually with Caitlyn, she does enough damage one tapping the backline already, so usually prioritize the heavyweight in for the Jayce before you prioritize the sniper for the Caitlyn. But of course, if you have an emblem, you can fit in everything once you level up past level 7. With this comp, one of the better power-ups here is actually Star Student. Star Student works really well because you get the extra potential for your units, and the extra potential is what really draws in a lot of damage. So a lot of times you play like 2 Star Student on Jayce and the Caitlyn, but there's also lots of different options, like Caitlyn gets efficient, for example. Jayce gets some other options. Jayce used to go for socialite in the best case scenario, so now there's like another situation there, but anything that helps Jayce to do a lot of damage will also help. He has a lot of good options as well. Caitlyn also, you can build towards any of the other fruits that gives her a lot of capabilities in terms of like you know, whatever fits your items is what I'm trying to say, right? You can take a crit one or like a Sky Piercer or something like that, based on if you're missing those components or missing those items on the units or on your board. Additionally, I think Caitlyn also gets precision, which sometimes works well. This one's a bit risky. You set your attack speed to 0.7, but then you convert attack speed into attack damage. This one's like kind of a meme a little bit, but then attacks deal more damage and generate mana. So basically, she's gonna cast like, it's kind of like weird. I think this one you really want to have blue buff is what I would say, because like your attacks generate some more mana, and the attacks do a lot of damage, but it's the attacks, not the ult. So it's kind of like a little bit awkward, I would say, to like make this work out in a wonderful way, because you're really hoping that her ult kills the backline, and this kind of like, unless you have a mana item as well, it kind of like, how do I phrase it? Unless you have like a blue buff or a mana gen item on her, it kind of makes it so that you're getting her game-changing ulting the backline effect a little bit less often, but it's still really good. Lots of people swear by it and say that it's one of her best ones, so I'm just letting you guys know about it. But like I said, lots of different options for you if you're playing around the Caitlyn on this board. Finally, I want to go through one last reroll comp. I'm just gonna pick Crew. I kind of default to saying Crew is really good, and then I play it, and then I say Crew is really bad. Crew right now, there were some buffs to Ziggs, which makes him a little bit better of a unit. But basically with Crew, it's basically the dedicated reroll trait. If you want to see more about it, you can check out my guide on Crew. It's in the How to Play playlist. It's over there. So I'm not going to explain it too much, but basically you're just rolling on level 4, level 5. Like you just roll, try and hit everybody on your board in order to cap out your board as high as possible. With this board, usually you're stabilizing around Malphite 3-star. You want to put as many chainmail items on this Malphite as possible because it has really good armor scaling. Additionally, you want to rush 3 items on Malphite a lot of the times because he gets his passive, which gets extra armor for the items that you equipped on him. Additionally, you have Ziggs. Ziggs does really well with attack speed and his passive that scales him with AP as well. So attack speed and AP. A lot of times like a Void Staff, Archangels is something that works out well. Gwynsu is kind of like on him. Like it's really good like to have a bunch of attack speed, but it kind of feels like a little bit of a waste in certain cases because like you just like him to hit like a truck anyways. So like what I usually suggest is like, you know, something like bow related items, like a Giant Slayer. Obviously you're gonna hear me say that a lot, but something like this where you have Void Staff, Giant Slayer, and then some sort of like Giga crit scaling instead of something hoping to ramp up. Something like this also works really well for Ziggs. And usually you're trying to prioritize towards Ziggs items. These items also can be a little bit flexible because Giant Slayer you can put on an early Sivir, and then you can play around the Sivir with some early items. What I would say is that you really like to have a lot of items with this comp, in my opinion, because you can itemize all your 3-stars. You can itemize Malphite with armor. You can itemize Shen with some AP related stuff. You can itemize Sivir, which is really important early game. A lot of times with Sivir, you're building her like a caster AD style build, right? You can build her with crit instead and other stuff. But additionally, your cap is around Ziggs. That's what makes this comp a little bit hit or miss. you can get everything 3-star, have everything good, but you don't hit the zigs, and it's really expensive, and you don't hit everything. So then you're going to fall off really hard late game. Additionally, TF spikes this board a lot. However, with the Ziggs buffs, I think a Ziggs 3 with no TF and just playing 4 crew is actually pretty reliable. You can still top 4 with it. It used to not be the case, but it's actually pretty good now. And usually you just play vertical strategist. If you have enough gold as well, you could go for Janna 3. Janna 3, because of her buffs, is actually a pretty good damage dealer and can stabilize you. So this could be your holder of Ziggs items until you have the Ziggs. Right? You can build your AD items on your Sivir, and then your Janna items over here. What I would say is that's why this comp feels a little bit high roll. You're really hoping to not only have a good spot for crew, hit your crew early so you get your crew bonuses, you get the extra XP per roll, and the extra free rerolls. That allows you to have the econ to hit your Ziggs and your Shen. Then you have to hit them all. Then you have to put the items on them. It's a very like it needs to be an obvious crew spot is what I would say. It's not something you just like rip and you say I'm gonna play crew. It's more so like, oh, I'm starting the game with a lot of Malphites, a lot of Sivers, I'll play towards crew. Specifically in the past, the other reroll line that people used to play was Jhin. I don't know why. I think crew buffs, like crew got nerfed, but like Ziggs buffs and general crew related buffs on the couple recent patches, usually you would play Jhin with snipers and you basically drop all of this shit. And you would just say, nah, I'll just play like Jhin. And then you play like protectors with Jhin, and Jhin becomes your main carry. The stats are saying Jhin is not that good. So I don't know what necessarily changed. I know Spirit Sword got worse on him because that got nerfed. But I thought that he was still fine with Artistic KO. So you could still play the Jhin board, which is you just play Jhin. You play 2 crew instead. And you play protectors. I had success with this today, by the way. Like, I played it today to try it out because I wasn't sure why it was bad. So I said I might as well try it out myself, put my Elo on the line, and figure out what's going on. I went first. Like, I don't know. So I don't know why the stats say it's really bad on the turn of this patch. I think it just has bad matchups, in my opinion, to some of the better lines. Like, this comp is really bad into, like, Star Guardian, and I think that's the more popular line. But typically with Jhin, I also talk about this in my Jhin guide, but basically you can build them with either crit, then you're going Spirit Sword, and not crit means that you're going more towards Artistic KO, which are his 2 better fruits to play. But that's typically how that comp kind of plays out. But I'll just give it an honorable mention. But I think crew is also something that can work out really well on the current patch. Additionally, we'll always have our honorable mentions. Good Kayle spots can easily win out, so obviously Kayle's really good. There's also other reroll lines, like some of the other monsters like Smolder that can be good from Smolder spots, obviously. But I think that his buffs relative to Kog'Maw is a lot better without the scaling leveling. Smolder already was like okay with the leveling mechanic, so it's pretty good. Even without Fusion Dance, Darius in certain high roll spots could be really strong. Because obviously it was still playable without Fusion Dance on the previous patch. In terms of some reroll comps. We talked about the extra 4 cost comps as well. So, you know, obviously there's the Volibear edgelords and those things. One thing I want to mention very aggressively here is that Ashe is absolute dog shit. She's basically like on par with like being a bugged unit right now. She is very bad. So if you're thinking about playing Ashe, don't play Ashe. Ashe right now, like I think I can show you the stats maybe, right? If we go under unit stats, she's averaging a 5. Right, this is like worse. I haven't seen a unit average a 5 since they were actually bugged. Like actually like they just didn't function correctly. The nerf that they did to her damage is so substantial. Now of course it might just be that people don't know how to play her properly, and maybe like we're gonna figure out some unique Ashe build that plays more into the buff / nerf that she got. She got like a little bit of a rework, but I would be really cautious. And the reason I mention it is not just because, like, I know it's obvious Ashe got nerfed, don't play Ashe, haha, Fenrir, you're a dumbass, like, why are you telling me this? The reason I'm mentioning it so much is because it also really affects Crystal Gambit. 7 Crystal Gambit got nerfed, so already it's hard to stabilize with 7 Crystal Gambit, in my opinion. You have less HP and less damage amp. Ashe being a primary carry in this case really hurts the 7 Crystal Gambit line. So obviously you can play Crystal Gambit to get your early cash outs and you get like the extra loot, but I would be very cautious about taking a Crystal Gambit emblem and playing towards 7 Crystal Gambit unless you have an insanely good spot for it. And a lot of that cruxes on the Ashe. I just want to put out that warning because I don't want people to, you know, you can easily just throw a game. She's very like non-functional right now in my opinion. So be careful about that. But anyways, oh, and one last thing. Mighty Mech, obviously, really good, but it's really dependent on finding the Yone early. 7 Mighty Mech is really strong. I just don't want to mention it because I think it's a little bit like, you know, I might as well just do it now very fast. I think 7 Mighty Mech is really strong, right? Playing around 7 Mighty Mech, the mech becomes the main carry. I think it's just a little bit awkward because you need to find the Yone early. Usually I like to play this from maybe trying to angle Karma and then you hit a Yone instead. So then instead of playing Sorc Karma, you just play Mighty Mech instead. One thing that works really nicely with this, however, is the changes they made to the fruit, the power-up. I don't know what it's called. Let me go Control F, Mighty Mech. Mech Pilot, right? Mech Pilot 2 now is a lot better. So this used to be bugged that the traits didn't properly work on the mech. So with Mech Pilot, now you get extra stats, and then 2 mech, you benefit from the pilot's traits. This is how I think you play around the Mighty Mech. Basically what you do is you take Mech Pilot now that it actually works properly, and you put it on Lucian and Senna. The thing that's really great about this is that if you find Mech Pilot 1, they also made it similar to how fan service works. If you find one Mech Pilot, you will always roll Mech Pilot on the other unit. And the reason you put on Senna is because with Senna, you get Executioner active. So you play this board, with a Rise. Now the Mighty Mech can crit. And then you give him the extra AP because you have the Sorc synergy activated, so you give him extra AP. These units are both useless backline units. You don't really care about them because you're not building towards them. And you can actually fish for the Mighty Mech power-up by just buying, selling Sennas. Lucian's a little bit harder to find if you're rolling on level 8. But if you hit it early on the Lucian, then you don't have to worry about it. You put on Senna as soon as you have it. Bang, bang. These get absorbed. This guy becomes an absolute juicer. He gets a bunch of AP, and he becomes able to crit a spell. So really, really powerful. Just keep that in mind. But like I said, this one's very temperamental. It's basically a Yone check. Do you have Yone? Yes, you play it. If you don't have Yone, no, you don't play it. You can maybe fast 9 around it, but that feels a little bit weird. There's other fast 9 boards that I think are better. So it's like, you know, do it at your own risk. Anyways, thanks for watching. Hopefully that was a good guide. Like I said, first day of the patch, so we're going to do another one of these next week, and you'll get some more updates if things change around, if some Akali lines become playable, or Volibear becomes much better than Soul Fighter, or etc, etc. We'll kind of break it down once again, starting next week, but that should hopefully get you started on the patch. Hopefully this was fun and enjoyable, and see ya. Bye-bye.